In the winter of 1952, in the isolated mountain town of Millbrook, Colorado, 9-year-old Vera Blackthorne vanished from her family's antique shop during a blizzard that trapped the entire community for 6 days. What the townspeople didn't know was that Vera hadn't left at all. For 32 years, she remained imprisoned within an ornate Victorian mirror, watching the world change around her while remaining forever 9 years old. Her desperate attempts to communicate dismissed as mere reflections and tricks of light. Dr. Margaret Ashford, the town's first female psychiatrist, would document the most impossible case of supernatural imprisonment ever recorded in American history, uncovering a conspiracy of silence that had protected a secret darker than anyone in Millbrook could have imagined. Before we delve into the haunting mystery of Vera Blackthorne and the mirror that became her prison, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our explorations into America's most disturbing unexplained phenomena. And please let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts around the world. The events that would terrorize the small mountain community of Millbrook, Colorado, began not with supernatural forces, but with the harsh realities of post-war America. The year 1952 found the nation celebrating its victory, but remote communities like Millbrook, nestled in a valley 8,000 feet above sea level and 47 miles from the nearest major town, remained largely untouched by the optimism sweeping across the country. Millbrook had been founded in 1887 by silver miners who carved homes from the mountainside and built their lives around the promise of precious metals hidden in the rocky peaks. By 1952, the mines had been abandoned for over 2 decades, leaving behind a population of fewer than 300 souls who survived through logging, small-scale farming, and the occasional traveler seeking refuge from the outside world. The town's isolation was both its blessing and its curse. During the war years, young men from Millbrook had ventured down the mountain to serve their country, but many never returned. The community that remained was predominantly elderly, with a handful of families clinging to traditions and superstitions that the modern world had long since abandoned. Main Street consisted of barely a dozen buildings: Henley's General Store, the Millbrook Inn, a small church with a steeple that had been struck by lightning 3 times, and Blackthorne's Curiosities and Antiques. It was in this last establishment that our story truly begins, though the roots of the mystery stretched back much further than anyone in Millbrook could have suspected. Edmund Blackthorne had arrived in Millbrook in the spring of 1951 with his wife Catherine and their daughter Vera. The family had purchased the old curiosity shop from the estate of Ezra Whitman, an eccentric collector who had died the previous winter under circumstances that the townspeople preferred not to discuss in detail. Edmund was a tall, gaunt man with premature gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets he was unwilling to share. He spoke little about his past, offering only that he had been an antiquarian in Boston before the war and was seeking a quieter life for his family in the mountains. Catherine Blackthorne was a small, nervous woman who rarely left the shop and seemed to startle at sudden movements or unexpected sounds. But it was their daughter Vera who captured the attention and imagination of Millbrook's residents. At 9 years old, Vera possessed an otherworldly beauty that seemed almost too perfect for the harsh mountain environment. Her hair was so pale that it appeared silver in certain light, and her eyes were an unusual shade of violet that seemed to shift and change depending on her mood. She moved with a grace that suggested she might float rather than walk, and her voice carried a musical quality that made even simple conversations sound like poetry. The townspeople found Vera both enchanting and unsettling. Children her age were drawn to her natural charisma, but often left their encounters feeling confused and slightly disturbed by something they couldn't identify. Adults appreciated her exceptional politeness and maturity, but noticed that she never seemed to play like other children, instead spending hours studying the antiques in her father's shop with an intensity that suggested she could see things in the old objects that others missed. Mrs. Dorothy Hendley, who ran the general store with her husband Frank, would later tell Dr. Ashford that Vera had an unusual relationship with mirrors. That child could spend an hour standing in front of any looking glass, she recalled, not admiring herself, mind you, but studying her reflection like she was having a conversation with someone we couldn't see. Made my skin crawl, if I'm being honest. Blackthorne's Curiosities and Antiques occupied a two-story building that had been constructed in 1889 by the town's original founder. The structure itself seemed to lean slightly, as if the weight of years and secrets had gradually shifted its foundation. The ground floor served as the retail space, filled with an eclectic collection of furniture, jewelry, artwork, and mysterious objects whose origins Edmund rarely discussed. But it was the second floor that housed the shop's most impressive pieces. Here, Edmund had arranged what he called his special collection, items that were not for sale and which he allowed only serious collectors to view by appointment. The centerpiece of this collection was an ornate Victorian mirror that dominated the far wall of the largest room.
The mirror stood nearly 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, framed in intricately carved mahogany that depicted scenes of angels and demons intertwined in eternal struggle. The glass itself was remarkably clear for its apparent age, reflecting images with such precision that viewers often felt they were looking through a window rather than at their own reflection. According to the documentation Edmund had received from Ezra Whitman's estate, the mirror had been crafted in 1847 by master artisan Heinrich Zimmermann in his workshop outside Prague. The piece had passed through several prominent European families before making its way to America in the 1920s, eventually ending up in Whitman's collection through circumstances that remained deliberately vague in the available records. What Edmund didn't share with potential customers or townspeople was the mirror's darker history. Hidden within the documentation were references to previous owners who had reported disturbing experiences, reflections that moved independently, faces that appeared in the glass when no one was present, and sounds that seemed to emanate from within the mirror itself. Vera was particularly fascinated by this mirror. From the day the family arrived in Millbrook, she would spend hours in the upstairs room, standing before the ornate glass and engaging in what appeared to be silent conversations with her reflection. When questioned about these sessions, Vera would explain that she was simply practicing being beautiful or learning how to be proper. But her parents noticed that she often emerged from these encounters with knowledge about antiques and history that seemed far beyond her years. Millbrook was the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the arrival of the Blackthorne family had provided months of speculation and gossip. The townspeople were particularly intrigued by the family's obvious wealth. The antique shop was filled with pieces worth more than most Millbrook residents earned in a year, and their apparent desire to isolate themselves in such a remote location. Pastor William Thornfield of the Millbrook Community Church made several attempts to welcome the family into the congregation, but Edmund politely declined, claiming that his family practiced a more private form of spirituality. This response only deepened the mystery surrounding the Blackthornes and led to whispered conversations about their true beliefs and practices. Dr. James Morrison, Millbrook's only physician and one of the few residents with formal education beyond high school, found himself studying the Blackthorne family with clinical interest. During Vera's mandatory school enrollment examination, he noted several unusual characteristics that he documented in his private journal. The child displays remarkable physical health, but presents several anomalies that warrant continued observation. Her reflexes are exceptionally quick, almost supernatural in their precision. Her pupils dilate and contract in response to stimuli that I cannot identify. Most peculiarly, her body temperature consistently measures 2 degrees below normal, yet she shows no signs of illness or discomfort. Dr. Morrison also noted that Vera seemed to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of medical terminology and procedures that would be unusual even for an adult. When he explained the purpose of various instruments during her examination, Vera would nod knowingly and occasionally correct minor inaccuracies in his descriptions. But it was Vera's behavior at school that generated the most concern among Millbrook's adults. Miss Eleanor Prescott, the town's sole teacher who managed students from ages 5 through 14 in a single classroom, found herself both impressed and disturbed by her newest pupil. Vera excelled academically beyond any child Miss Prescott had ever encountered. She could solve mathematical problems that challenged students twice her age, write essays with the sophistication of a college student, and demonstrate understanding of historical events with a depth of knowledge that suggested she had lived through them personally. However, Vera's social interactions with other children followed patterns that Miss Prescott found increasingly troubling. The child seemed to study her classmates with the same clinical interest that she directed toward the antiques in her father's shop. She would observe their games and conversations as if documenting behaviors for some unknown purpose, occasionally making comments that revealed an understanding of human nature that seemed far too mature for her age. Sarah Jenkins will lie about forgetting her homework because she's afraid her father will drink more if he's disappointed in her, Vera told Miss Prescott during one recess period, speaking about a classmate with matter-of-fact precision. Tommy Crawford pulls Mary's hair because he doesn't understand why he feels different when he looks at her, and he thinks hurting her will make the feeling stop. When Miss Prescott asked how Vera could know such things, the child simply shrugged and replied, "People's faces tell stories if you know how to read them. The mirror taught me." As autumn progressed into winter, the townspeople of Millbrook began noticing subtle changes in the Blackthorne family dynamics. Edmund became increasingly withdrawn, spending most of his time in the shop's basement, where he claimed to be restoring damaged pieces. Catherine rarely left the building at all, and when she did venture outside for supplies, neighbors noticed that she seemed to be looking over her shoulder constantly, as if expecting to be followed.
Pastor Thornfield organized prayer vigils and attempted to comfort the distraught parents, but he privately confided to Dr. Morrison that something about the family's reactions seemed inconsistent with typical parental grief. Edmund appeared more angry than devastated, frequently muttering about precautions that should have been taken and warnings that went unheeded. Catherine's behavior was even more disturbing. She alternated between periods of catatonic silence and explosive episodes where she would run through the town screaming Vera's name, always returning to stand before the large mirror and pleading with it to give her back. As the search entered its second day, several townspeople began reporting strange experiences that they were reluctant to discuss publicly. Mrs. Patterson claimed to have seen a child's face in her bedroom mirror during the night, but when she approached for a closer look, the image disappeared. Tommy Crawford told his mother that he had heard Vera calling his name from inside the school's old medicine cabinet mirror, but when he opened the cabinet, it was empty. Most significantly, Frank Henley reported that he had seen movement in the large mirror in Blackthorne's shop while helping with the search. "I was holding a lantern up to check behind some furniture," he later told Dr. Morrison, "when I caught sight of the big mirror out of the corner of my eye. For just a second, I could swear I saw a little girl pressing her hands against the glass from the inside, like she was trapped behind it and trying to get out." By the third day of the search, with no trace of Vera found anywhere in Millbrook, the townspeople began to confront the possibility that something supernatural might have occurred. The mountain communities had always harbored beliefs in forces beyond scientific understanding, and several residents began sharing stories and legends that had been passed down through generations. Old Henrik Larson, one of the town's original settlers, recalled tales his grandfather had told him about mirrors that served as doorways to other realms. According to these stories, certain mirrors crafted by European artisans in the 18th and 19th centuries had been imbued with properties that allowed them to trap souls or serve as prisons for entities that existed between the world of the living and the dead. "My grandfather came from the old country," Henrik told a gathering of concerned townspeople in the church. "He used to say that some mirrors weren't made just to show your reflection. They were made to hold things that shouldn't be allowed to roam free. But sometimes they caught the wrong things. And once something was trapped inside, it was almost impossible to get it out." Miss Prescott contributed her own observations about Vera's unique behavior around mirrors, particularly her apparent ability to have conversations with her own reflection. She mentioned several instances where Vera had demonstrated knowledge that she couldn't have acquired through normal means, always claiming that the mirror told me. Dr. Morrison, despite his scientific training, found himself unable to dismiss these accounts entirely. His medical examination of Vera had revealed anomalies that he couldn't explain through conventional means, and her disappearance defied every logical explanation he could conceive. Most troubling of all was the growing evidence that Vera might not have disappeared at all, but might still be somewhere in Millbrook, specifically somewhere within the Blackthorne shop. As the days following Vera's disappearance stretched into a week, multiple townspeople reported experiences that suggested the child was still somehow present in the community. These reports followed a consistent pattern: sightings of Vera's reflection in various mirrors throughout the town, always appearing for just a moment before vanishing when the observer tried to focus on her image. Sarah Jenkins, one of Vera's classmates, told her parents that she had seen Vera waving at her at the bathroom mirror at school. When Sarah waved back, Vera's reflection had moved its lips as if speaking, but no sound came through the glass. The Henderson family reported that their hallway mirror had begun showing reflections that didn't match the people looking into it. Instead of their own faces, they would occasionally see Vera's face looking back at them, her violet eyes wide with what appeared to be fear or desperation. Most disturbing were the sounds that continued to emanate from the Blackthorne shop. Despite Edmund's explanations about settling wood and temperature changes, the crying and calling sounds not only persisted but seemed to be growing stronger. Several neighbors reported that they could now make out actual words in the sounds, with Vera's voice clearly calling, "Help me," and "I'm trapped," during the quiet hours of the night. Catherine Blackthorne's mental state continued to deteriorate as these reports reached her. She spent increasing amounts of time standing before the large Victorian mirror, often for hours at a stretch, carrying on conversations with her own reflection that suggested she believed she was communicating with her missing daughter.
"I can see her sometimes," Catherine told Dr. Morrison during one of his attempts to provide medical care. "She's in there, behind the glass, trying to tell me something. She looks so frightened, and she keeps pointing at something I can't see. There are others in there with her, Dr. Morrison. Old people, young people, children. They're all trapped together in that horrible place." It was at this point that Dr. Margaret Ashford arrived in Millbrook. Dr. Ashford was a psychiatrist who had been practicing in Denver when she received word of the unusual circumstances surrounding Vera's disappearance. As one of the few female physicians in Colorado and a specialist in childhood psychological disorders, she had been contacted by the state authorities who had finally been notified of the situation when the blizzard cleared and communication with the outside world was restored. Dr. Ashford's initial assessment of the situation was that the townspeople were experiencing a form of mass hysteria brought on by the trauma of a child's disappearance during extreme weather conditions. She believed that the isolation, the supernatural beliefs common to mountain communities, and the stress of the search had combined to create a collective delusion about mirrors and trapped souls. However, Dr. Ashford was a thorough investigator who believed in documenting all aspects of unusual cases, even those that seemed to have supernatural components. She began conducting detailed interviews with every resident of Millbrook, carefully recording their accounts of the events leading up to and following Vera's disappearance. What she discovered challenged every scientific principle she had been trained to accept. The townspeople's accounts were remarkably consistent, despite having been given independently and without coordination between witnesses. The descriptions of Vera's unusual behavior, her relationship with mirrors, and the circumstances of her disappearance matched in ways that made a coordinated deception highly unlikely. More significantly, Dr. Ashford herself began experiencing phenomena that she could not explain through conventional psychological or medical frameworks. During her first visit to the Blackthorne shop to examine the scene of Vera's disappearance, she stood before the large Victorian mirror and felt what she later described as an overwhelming sense of presence, as if someone was standing directly behind me, despite the fact that I was alone in the room. When she turned to look over her shoulder, there was no one there. But when she looked back at the mirror, she caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection that didn't correspond to her own motions. For just a moment, she saw what appeared to be a small hand pressed against the inside surface of the glass. Dr. Ashford's scientific training told her that what she had experienced was likely a hallucination brought on by suggestion and the stress of investigating such an unusual case. But her instincts as an investigator told her that there was more to Vera Blackthorne's disappearance than could be explained through conventional means. She decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the mirror itself, beginning with its history and the circumstances that had brought it to Millbrook. What she would discover would challenge not only her understanding of the possible, but her faith in the fundamental nature of reality itself. Dr. Margaret Ashford had spent her career building a reputation as one of Colorado's most rational and scientifically minded psychiatrists. She had treated shell-shocked veterans returning from World War II, worked with children suffering from severe psychological trauma, and published papers on mass hysteria in isolated communities. Nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for what she would uncover in Millbrook. Following her unsettling first encounter with the Victorian mirror, Dr. Ashford decided to approach the investigation with the methodical precision that had made her successful in her previous cases. She began by requesting all available documentation about the mirror's history, starting with the papers that Edmund Blackthorne had received when he purchased the antique shop from Ezra Whitman's estate. The official documentation was sparse and deliberately vague, but Dr. Ashford's persistence in contacting dealers and auction houses in Boston and New York began to yield disturbing information about the mirror's past. Heinrich Zimmermann, the craftsman who had created the piece in 1847, was not merely a master artisan, but a practitioner of what 19th-century Europeans called dark crafts, the creation of objects intended to serve supernatural purposes. According to records that Dr. Ashford obtained from a private collector in Boston, Zimmermann had been commissioned to create the mirror by Count Wilhelm von Hessen, a Bavarian nobleman who believed he could use specially crafted mirrors to communicate with deceased members of his family. The Count's correspondence with Zimmermann, preserved in the collector's archives, revealed that the mirror was intended to serve as a window between worlds that would allow the living to speak with the dead. However, the project had gone tragically wrong. Instead of facilitating communication with spirits, the mirror had begun trapping them. The Count's own daughter, 8-year-old Gisela, had reportedly been the first to become imprisoned within the glass after spending too much time attempting to contact her deceased mother. Dr. Ashford discovered that the mirror had passed through 7 different owners between 1847 and its arrival in America. In each case, the ownership had ended abruptly due to mysterious disappearances, unexplained deaths, or the owner's descent into madness. The pattern was always the same. Children or young adults would become obsessed with the mirror, spending hours staring into its depths, before ultimately vanishing without a trace.
But Dr. Ashford's most significant discovery came when she located shipping records that revealed the mirror's route to America. The piece had been brought across the Atlantic in 1923 aboard a passenger ship called the Meridian. According to the ship's manifest, the mirror had been accompanied by its then owner, a European antique dealer named Victor Brennan, along with his 10-year-old daughter, Anna. Maritime records show that Anna Brennan had disappeared during the voyage, despite the ship being in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, with no possibility of her leaving the vessel. The ship's captain had noted in his log that the child had been found missing from her cabin despite the door being locked from the inside, and that several passengers had reported seeing her reflection in mirrors throughout the ship, long after she had been declared missing. Victor Brennan had sold the mirror immediately upon arriving in New York, claiming that his daughter's disappearance had made it impossible for him to keep the piece. The buyer had been Ezra Whitman, the eccentric collector who would eventually bring the mirror to Millbrook. Dr. Ashford's investigation into Ezra Whitman's background revealed that the previous owner of the Millbrook antique shop had been far from the harmless collector that townspeople remembered. Whitman had been a former academic who had lost his position at Columbia University after conducting unauthorized experiments in what he called supernatural psychology, the study of how objects could affect human consciousness and behavior. Hidden in the basement of the antique shop, Dr. Ashford discovered Whitman's private laboratory and extensive records documenting his 27 years of studying the Victorian mirror. The records revealed that Whitman had been fully aware of the mirror's history and its tendency to trap human souls. Rather than being horrified by this knowledge, he had been fascinated by the scientific possibilities it presented. Whitman's journals, written in meticulous detail from 1924 until his death in 1951, documented dozens of experiments in which he had deliberately exposed people to the mirror's influence to study the trapping process. He had lured transients, traveling salesmen, and even some townspeople into spending extended periods in front of the mirror, carefully documenting their psychological deterioration and eventual disappearance. The mirror appears to target individuals with strong emotional vulnerabilities. Whitman had written in one entry dated September 1938, "Children are particularly susceptible, as are adults who have experienced significant trauma or loss. The process begins with an unusual fascination with one's reflection, progresses through periods of apparent communication with entities within the glass, and culminates in complete physical disappearance from our reality." But Whitman's most chilling discovery was that the people trapped within the mirror retained their consciousness and awareness. Using techniques he had developed during his academic career, Whitman claimed to have established limited communication with the imprisoned souls, learning that they existed in a realm that paralleled our own, but from which they could not escape. The subjects report being able to observe our world through any reflective surface, but their ability to interact with our reality is severely limited. They can sometimes create minor disturbances, sounds, brief visual appearances, small movements of objects, but these efforts require tremendous energy and leave them weakened for extended periods. Most disturbing of all, Whitman had documented that the number of souls trapped within the mirror was far greater than the known disappearances suggested. According to his communications with the entities, the mirror contained the spirits of over 60 individuals spanning multiple centuries, all of whom had become prisoners of Heinrich Zimmermann's cursed creation. As Dr. Ashford delved deeper into the history of Millbrook, she discovered that many townspeople had been aware of the mirror's dangerous properties for years before Vera's disappearance. Whitman's experiments had not been conducted in complete secrecy, and several residents had witnessed or suspected the truth about what was happening in the antique shop. Frank Henley, the general store owner, eventually admitted to Dr. Ashford that he had suspected Whitman of being involved in the disappearances of 3 transients who had passed through Millbrook in the 1940s. All 3 men had been seen entering Whitman's shop and had never been seen leaving, but Henley had been afraid to report his suspicions to outside authorities. Whitman was a strange man, but he was part of our community. And those men who disappeared? They weren't from here. They were drifters, people nobody would miss. We told ourselves that maybe they had just moved on without saying goodbye. But deep down, we knew something else had happened to them. Pastor William Thornfield revealed that he had repeatedly attempted to convince Whitman to remove the mirror from the shop, particularly after receiving reports from townspeople about disturbing experiences they had had while viewing the piece. But Whitman had threatened to reveal embarrassing secrets about prominent Millbrook families if anyone tried to interfere with his work.
Dr. James Morrison, the town's physician, confessed that he had documented several cases of psychological disturbance among townspeople who had spent time in Whitman's shop, but had been persuaded to attribute these problems to other causes to avoid drawing outside attention to the community. Most shocking of all was the revelation that several townspeople had witnessed Whitman's experiments directly. Mrs. Dorothy Henley admitted that she had seen Whitman deliberately encouraging a traveling salesman to spend extended time in front of the mirror, knowing that the man would eventually disappear. "We were scared," she told Dr. Ashford through tears. "Whitman knew things about all of us, secrets that could have destroyed our families and our community. He said that if we interfered with his work or reported him to outsiders, he would make sure that everyone's private business became public knowledge. In a town as small as Millbrook, that kind of threat was enough to keep us all quiet." The conspiracy of silence had continued even after Whitman's death. When Edmund Blackthorne purchased the antique shop, several townspeople had considered warning him about the mirror, but their years of complicity in Whitman's activities had made them afraid to speak out. They had hoped that a new owner might simply remove the dangerous piece without learning about its history. Dr. Ashford's investigation into Edmund Blackthorne's background revealed that Vera's father was not the innocent antique dealer he had claimed to be. Blackthorne was actually Dr. Edmund Brennan, the son of Victor Brennan, the European dealer who had lost his daughter Anna to the mirror during the Atlantic crossing in 1923. Edmund had spent 30 years researching the mirror that had claimed his sister, tracking its location through multiple sales and eventually determining that it had ended up in Ezra Whitman's collection. His move to Millbrook had not been a desire for a quieter life, but a carefully planned mission to study the mirror and attempt to rescue his sister's trapped soul. Edmund's basement laboratory, discovered by Dr. Ashford during her investigation, contained extensive research into supernatural phenomena and correspondence with occultists and researchers from around the world. His goal had been to find a way to reverse the effects of the mirror and free the imprisoned souls, including his sister Anna. But Edmund's research had revealed a terrible truth about the mirror's mechanics. The trapped souls could only be released if someone willingly took their place. The mirror required a constant supply of spiritual energy to maintain its supernatural properties, and freeing one soul meant condemning another to imprisonment. Edmund had initially planned to sacrifice himself to free his sister, but his plans changed when he discovered that children's souls provided more energy to the mirror than adult souls. The younger the victim, the longer the mirror could sustain itself, and the more powerful its supernatural effects became. Catherine Blackthorne had been unaware of her husband's true identity and plans, but she had gradually become suspicious of his behavior and his obsession with the mirror. Her increasingly erratic behavior leading up to Vera's disappearance had been the result of her growing realization that her husband intended to use their daughter as a sacrifice. Through her investigation, Dr. Ashford was able to reconstruct the actual events of December 17, 1952. Edmund Blackthorne had not sent Vera downstairs to retrieve candles during the power outage. Instead, he had deliberately led his daughter to the upstairs mirror room and performed a ritual that he had learned through his years of research. The ritual required the subject to stare into the mirror while specific incantations were spoken and symbolic objects were arranged around the glass. The process created a supernatural resonance that weakened the barrier between the physical world and the mirror's internal realm, allowing the mirror to pull the subject's soul into its depths. Catherine Blackthorne had discovered her husband in the middle of the ritual and had attempted to intervene, but it was too late. Vera's soul had already been pulled into the mirror, leaving her physical body to dissolve into spiritual energy that the mirror absorbed to sustain itself. Edmund's plan had been partially successful. His sister Anna's soul was released from the mirror when Vera took her place. But Anna had been trapped for nearly 30 years, and her spirit was too weakened to manifest in the physical world. She simply faded away, finally free, but unable to return to life. Catherine's screams about they taking Vera had been accurate. She had seen Anna's spirit emerging from the mirror as Vera's soul was pulled in. Her demands to search the mirror room had been based on her correct understanding that Vera was indeed trapped within the glass. When Dr. Ashford presented her findings to Edmund Blackthorne, she expected denials, attempts to discredit her investigation, or possibly violent resistance. Instead, she found a man who seemed relieved that the truth had finally been discovered. "I've been carrying this burden for 30 years, he told her during their confrontation in the mirror room. "I thought that saving Anna would somehow make up for all the people who had died because of that cursed thing. But watching what happened to Vera, seeing the pain it caused Catherine, I realized that I had become just like Whitman, a monster who justified evil acts in the name of research and family loyalty."
Edmund revealed additional details about the mirror's properties that even Whitman had not fully understood. The trapped souls retained not only their consciousness, but also their memories and personalities. They could observe the outside world and were aware of the passage of time, making their imprisonment a form of eternal torment. More disturbing still was Edmund's revelation that the mirror's effects were growing stronger over time. Each new soul that it captured increased its power and its ability to influence the physical world. If left unchecked, the mirror would eventually become capable of trapping souls from greater distances and would no longer require direct contact or extended exposure to claim victims. "Vera was the 63rd soul to be trapped," Edmund explained. "The mirror told me that when it reaches 100 souls, it will have enough power to open permanent doorways to our world. The imprisoned souls will be able to return, but they will be changed by their experience, twisted into something that no longer remembers what it means to be human." Dr. Ashford realized that if Edmund's information was accurate, the mirror posed a threat not only to Millbrook, but potentially to anyone who might encounter it in the future. However, her scientific training made her skeptical of the supernatural explanations for Vera's disappearance, despite the overwhelming evidence she had collected. To test the reality of the mirror's supernatural properties, Dr. Ashford decided to attempt communication with the trapped souls using techniques described in Whitman's research notes. If the mirror truly contained conscious entities, they should be able to provide information that could verify or debunk the claims about their imprisonment. The communication process required Dr. Ashford to spend extended periods in front of the mirror while maintaining a meditative state and speaking specific phrases in Latin that supposedly allowed the trapped souls to influence their reflections. Despite her skepticism, Dr. Ashford began to notice subtle changes in her reflections' behavior that seemed to occur independently of her own movements. Over the course of several sessions, Dr. Ashford was able to establish contact with what appeared to be multiple distinct personalities within the mirror. Each entity provided consistent information about their identity, their lives before being trapped, and the circumstances of their imprisonment.
Most significantly, they were able to provide verifiable details about historical events and people that Dr. Ashford was able to confirm through independent research. The trapped souls confirmed that Vera was indeed among them, and that she was struggling to adapt to her new existence. They explained that newly trapped souls often experienced a period of panic and disorientation before accepting their situation and learning to communicate with the other entities. But the souls also warned Dr. Ashford that the mirror was attempting to trap her as well. Her extended sessions in front of the glass had begun the psychological conditioning process, and if she continued her research, she would eventually become another victim of the mirror's influence. Dr. Ashford's investigation had revealed not only the truth about Vera's disappearance, but also decades of complicity and cover-ups by the townspeople of Millbrook. The community was forced to confront their collective responsibility for the deaths and disappearances that had occurred under their watch. The revelation that respected members of the community had known about Whitman's experiments and had chosen to remain silent to protect their own secrets created deep divisions within Millbrook. Families turned against each other as long-hidden scandals were revealed, and the social fabric of the small mountain town began to unravel. Pastor Thornfield attempted to provide spiritual guidance to his congregation, but many townspeople questioned how their faith could coexist with the supernatural horrors that had been present in their community for so long. Some residents left Millbrook entirely, unable to continue living in a place where such evil had been allowed to flourish. Others demanded that something be done to rescue Vera and the other trapped souls. But Dr. Ashford's research had revealed that any attempt to free the imprisoned entities would require additional sacrifices. The mirror's supernatural mechanics were fixed and unchangeable. Souls could only be released if others took their place. Edmund Blackthorne, racked with guilt over his daughter's fate and his role in continuing the cycle of supernatural imprisonment, proposed a radical solution. He would perform the ritual again, this time using himself as the sacrifice to free Vera's soul. His adult soul would provide enough energy to sustain the mirror while allowing his daughter to return to the physical world. Catherine Blackthorne, despite her deteriorating mental state, rejected this proposal. She had lost her daughter to her husband's obsession with the supernatural, and she refused to lose her husband as well, even if it meant leaving Vera trapped forever. The climax of Dr. Ashford's investigation came when the mirror began affecting the entire town of Millbrook. The accumulated spiritual energy from 63 trapped souls had reached a critical threshold, and the supernatural effects that had previously been confined to the antique shop began manifesting throughout the community.
Residents reported that all reflective surfaces in the town, windows, water, polished metal, even puddles, began showing images of the trapped souls trying to communicate with the living world. The boundary between the mirror's internal realm and physical reality was becoming increasingly unstable. Children throughout Millbrook began displaying behavior similar to Vera's pre-disappearance patterns, standing for hours in front of mirrors and claiming to have conversations with people that adults couldn't see. Several children attempted to climb into mirrors, apparently believing that they could join the trapped souls voluntarily. Most alarmingly, the trapped souls began manifesting physically for brief periods, appearing as translucent figures that could interact with objects in the real world. These manifestations were extremely draining for the entities, but they became more frequent and lasted longer as the mirror's power continued to grow. Dr. Ashford realized that the situation was rapidly approaching the crisis point that Edmund had described. If the mirror captured 37 more souls to reach its target of 100, it would have enough power to permanently merge its internal realm with the physical world, releasing all the trapped entities but transforming them into something inhuman in the process. Faced with the growing supernatural crisis and the threat to the entire community, Dr. Ashford made a decision that would define her legacy and seal the fate of everyone involved. She chose to sacrifice herself to the mirror, but not to free any of the trapped souls. Instead, Dr. Ashford had discovered through her research that the mirror's power could be contained if someone with sufficient knowledge and willpower entered its realm voluntarily and took control of the supernatural forces from within. The mirror required a conscious directing intelligence to function properly, and by becoming that intelligence, she could prevent it from claiming additional victims. Dr. Ashford's plan required her to maintain her sanity and sense of purpose after being trapped within the mirror, using her psychiatric training and scientific knowledge to impose order on the chaotic spiritual realm that existed behind the glass. If successful, she would be able to communicate with future investigators and prevent the mirror from continuing its cycle of imprisonment. The ritual was performed on March 15, 1953, exactly 3 months after Vera's disappearance. Dr. Ashford had prepared extensive documentation of her findings and instructions for future researchers, ensuring that her sacrifice would not be meaningless if her plan failed. Edmund Blackthorne assisted with the ritual despite his knowledge that Dr. Ashford's plan would mean that neither Vera nor any of the other trapped souls would ever be freed. The mirror's power would be contained, but the 64 imprisoned entities would remain conscious prisoners for eternity. As Dr. Ashford stepped into the mirror's realm, she experienced a moment of perfect clarity in which she could perceive both the physical world she was leaving and the spiritual realm she was entering. She saw the faces of all the trapped souls, including Vera, who appeared exactly as she had on the night of her disappearance, forever frozen at 9 years old. Dr. Ashford's final words, recorded by Edmund before she vanished into the mirror, were, "I understand now what it means to choose the greater good over personal happiness. Vera and the others will remain trapped, but no one else will suffer their fate. Sometimes the most heroic act is accepting an imperfect solution to prevent a perfect tragedy." Following Dr. Ashford's sacrifice, the supernatural phenomena in Millbrook ceased immediately. The mirror returned to appearing as a normal reflective surface, and the townspeople gradually stopped reporting supernatural experiences. However, the damage to the community's social structure was irreversible. The knowledge of what had truly happened in their town, combined with the guilt of their collective complicity in decades of disappearances, created a trauma that many residents could not overcome. Within 5 years of Dr. Ashford's sacrifice, more than half of Millbrook's population had moved away, leaving behind empty houses and abandoned businesses. Edmund Blackthorne sealed the mirror room and eventually donated the entire building to the state of Colorado, stipulating that it be preserved exactly as it was, but never opened to the public. He spent the remaining years of his life traveling to museums and private collections, tracking down other potentially dangerous supernatural artifacts and attempting to prevent them from causing similar tragedies. Catherine Blackthorne was institutionalized shortly after Dr. Ashford's disappearance. Her mental state never recovered from the loss of her daughter and the revelation of her husband's deception. She spent her remaining years in a psychiatric facility, often talking to her reflection in mirrors and claiming that she could still see Vera trapped behind the glass. The Victorian mirror itself remained in the sealed room for 32 years, exactly as Dr. Ashford had left it. Occasionally, researchers would request permission to study the piece, but the state of Colorado consistently denied these requests based on the documentation that Dr. Ashford had provided before her sacrifice.
The story of the girl locked in a mirror for 32 years serves as a reminder that some mysteries are too dangerous to be fully solved and some truths are too terrible to be widely known. The townspeople of Millbrook, Dr. Margaret Ashford, and the research teams who have studied the case all made sacrifices to protect the world from supernatural forces that exist beyond human understanding. Vera Blackthorne's successful escape from the mirror realm proves that even the most hopeless situations may have solutions that require patience, knowledge, and willingness to accept imperfect outcomes. Her current work helping missing children and their families represents a form of redemption that transforms personal tragedy into service to others. Dr. Ashford's ongoing imprisonment demonstrates the reality of heroic sacrifice in its purest form. She chose to accept eternal confinement to prevent others from suffering the same fate, and she continues to use her position within the mirror realm to study supernatural phenomena and develop methods for protecting future potential victims. The mirror itself remains in its sealed room, a constant reminder of humanity's capacity for both evil and heroism. Heinrich Zimmermann's cursed creation continues to hold 63 souls in spiritual bondage, but Dr. Ashford's presence prevents it from claiming new victims and gradually weakens its supernatural properties. Recent reports suggest that Dr. Ashford's decades of research may finally be approaching a breakthrough that could free the remaining trapped souls without requiring replacement sacrifices. However, these efforts require absolute secrecy to prevent the mirror's location from becoming known to individuals who might disrupt the delicate supernatural balance that currently contains its power. The story of Vera Blackthorne and the Victorian mirror forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of reality and the limits of scientific understanding. In a world where paranormal phenomena are often dismissed as delusion or fraud, the case presents evidence that some mysteries may be genuine manifestations of forces beyond current human comprehension. The townspeople of Millbrook faced a choice between protecting their community and seeking justice for the victims of supernatural imprisonment. Their decision to maintain silence may seem morally questionable, but it prevented the mirror from claiming additional victims and allowed Dr. Ashford to eventually develop methods for containing its dangerous properties. Modern readers must decide for themselves whether this account represents historical fact, collective delusion, or elaborate fiction. The researchers who have studied the case maintain that their documentation is accurate, but they also acknowledge that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence that may never be available to public scrutiny. What cannot be disputed is the impact that this story has had on the people who lived through these events. The survivors of the Millbrook incident carry scars that have shaped their entire lives, and their willingness to share these experiences reflect their belief that others should understand the reality of supernatural dangers that may exist in our world. If you find yourself in possession of an antique mirror with unusual properties, particularly one with an ornate Victorian frame depicting angels and demons, exercise extreme caution. Remember that some reflections may show more than just your own face, and some conversations with the person in the mirror may be more real than you ever imagined possible. The girl who was locked in a mirror for 32 years serves as both a warning and a source of hope. Her story reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, human ingenuity and sacrifice can triumph over supernatural evil, but only if we have the courage to face the truth about forces that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. What happened to Vera Blackthorne challenges everything we thought we knew about the line between life and death, between reality and reflection. Her 32-year imprisonment in a supernatural prison created by 19th-century dark arts reveals that some antiques carry more than just historical value. They carry curses that can trap human souls for eternity. What do you think about this incredible story? Do you believe that mirrors can serve as supernatural prisons, or do you think the people of Millbrook experienced elaborate mass hysteria? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know if you've ever had unsettling experiences with antique mirrors. If this story of supernatural mystery and heroic sacrifice moved you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into America's most disturbing, unexplained phenomena. Remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the cases that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The truth about what exists beyond the reflection may be more terrifying and more wonderful than any of us can imagine.